What's up, everybody? Welcome to Theory Underground. Today, I'm sharing with you all a video that I'm so excited to be putting out. This is a conversation between myself, Brian, and Ann, three people who care so much about learning and really living the learner lifestyle. And we have each in our own ways experienced frustration getting that through existing institutions. We're not anti-institutions, but we've sure got our problems. And so that's why when Theory Underground began, we did this course. I invited them both to do Karl Jaspers, The Idea of the University, with me. And so what you're about to see is that conversation in conjunction with what it really sets us up for, which is Brian's sequel event. It's like a follow-up lecture series on the work of Ivan Illich, right? And so Brian's gone really into the deep end with Ivan Illich. And so we'll move from talking about the idea of university into talking about Ivan Illich, who's like the father of deschooling, this distinction between learning and schooling or education, and really just he ends up being also called like the father of critical pedagogy, even though that's really not his focus as much as, say, his fellow traveler Paulo Freire. All right, and so with all of that said, this is from an 11-hour live stream that was held on December 6th, 2023. It's the 1-year anniversary of Theory Underground, and I'm putting it out as a standalone video because I hope that will make it more accessible for all of you who look at an 11-hour stream and go, there's no way I'll ever have time for that. Don't worry. I thought about you a long time ago. Planned this all out just for you. Peace. All right, everybody, welcome to Theory Underground. I am your host, David McKerracher, and today I'm joined by two of my closest fellow travelers, Brian Weeks, someone I've been collaborating with for, I don't know, better part of like a decade, and then Ann Snellgrove McKerracher. The nepotism is shameless in this place, I swear to God. We all three taught the first course at Theory Underground. It was the three of us, and that was very deliberate on my part. And so what I just wanted to do with this time as we get set up here to talk about the course that Brian will be teaching on Ivan Illich is, first of all, talk a little bit about the idea of university, the class itself, as well as the actual idea. And then that'll set us up to talk about this as some kind of like a sequel. What did teaching that course do to your thinking? How's it change your life?
I was going to say, yeah, the idea of the university, like, just opened up this extra lens or this extra kind of philosophical basis that I needed because I was already really interested in the critique of higher education kind of from a sociological lens. And I think it was like I always knew that, okay, I need some sort of philosophical basis, but having Jaspers, and I'm sure there are so many other kind of philosophy of educational perspectives that like Brian will teach and that I will discover over the next few years, but having that positive critique that is just so, it's very succinct, like it's not a long book. And I think having that basis, not only as the basis of Theory Underground and kind of what we're trying to do, and then talking about, well, here's what we're not trying to do that the current university has kind of become. Like, that really inspired me to even want to pursue a master's because I thought, if this is kind of my route, and then I can develop philosophically, sociologically, look at educational policy and practice and go from there. And I want to make every college student read The Idea of the University. And I know they never will because at this point, professors like won't even assign introductions to books. They're like, oh, just give them this article. So I'm like deeply passionate about, even if I don't necessarily think it's like the best work on philosophy of education, because like I said, I'm not as well versed in the field as like Brian and Dave. But I'm just like, I wish every professor would read it and make other students read it because it really just is about like why the university, why it matters, what it should look like. And so that it really like lit a fire within me and kind of my own desire to study and understand this. And so I'm glad I got to be a part of it as kind of the person who had read it for the first time and could tie my own little sociological perspective in. But I'm looking forward to reading it probably multiple times as I go and pursue another degree.
All right, there we go. Yeah, I have like, it's the idea of the university as a text is a book I keep thinking about a lot. I also think a lot about the course, because for me, it was like one of those courses I'm like, man, I really wish I could go back and redo.
Same.
Maybe I'll touch on that second, but like, yeah, is that book, I think, because my primary focus in research over the years has been on the K-12 education sphere, and my master's thesis focused on the sort of primary education side of things rather than on the university side. And actually, I think that Jaspers helped me to think about how they are or ought to be different. And to like further, something I continue thinking about is the way in which the university has been schooled, to kind of hint at some Illich language, and to its detriment, that it no longer is really fulfilling its higher purpose or even purporting to. I think for Jaspers, that's always an ideal that gets missed, but really having truth at the center of the university is off the radar as far as a concern, at least in the experience of myself and people I've talked to at various universities around the country. And the other thing that from the text that really a proposal he makes, I'd have to go back, I don't have it in front of me, that just kind of keeps lingering on my mind. I don't know if this is the same for you guys, but the proposal that a department is developed for the study of technology as kind of like a new approach to the university facing or dealing with the problems we have now. I can't stop thinking about that in relation to everything else I read and am currently doing in my own research, and how important and useful that perspective might be. And thinking about what technology is and how we use it and how to respond to new technology. I think that's been really helpful, and at least in kind of giving me some something to hold on to in thought. But I could, Dave, maybe you could talk a little bit about your own experience or like your thoughts, your reflections before I jump into those other, like I mentioned, the regrets.
Before you go into talking about some of the regrets of the course, of how we did the course.
Yeah. The things I wish I had done or had been different.
Okay, yeah, and so I'll save my thoughts about that as well. And I'm sure you've got some. And so we'll all talk about, as Cadell was saying, the negation that's always instrumental to any kind of positive development. And so my main thing with Karl Jaspers was listening to the idea of the universe. I don't know how I came upon that book. If anybody in the audience happened to recommend it to me and I didn't notice, thank you. I think it was referenced in something else that I was listening to, and I remember thinking, that's a thing? Wait, he wrote a whole book on that? Because to me, I've heard these sort of humanities-based classical sort of professors who kind of nostalgize the good old days of academia. And there's a baby in that bathwater. I'm not trying to diminish them. But I've heard them say things about the idea of university. I've heard them say things about what it's ultimately for. I've heard them kind of reference this ideal, and I never had an actual text, a philosophical primary, source on that. And so I looked it up. I was working at Amazon. That was the night shift. It was brutal. 13 hours at Amazon every night, overnight. And I would just listen to whole books every night. I'd record them on my computer. I'd use a robot reader in Audacity. I'd record the robot reader, and then I'd make my own MP3s because there's no Wi-Fi in that warehouse. There is at this other one that we're currently working at. But then I would work and listen in my hidden earbud. At this point, everybody should have seen the PSA, and you all know about the hidden earbud. Well, listening to Jaspers, I was just like, oh my gosh, getting so excited. And I was like in the process of developing Theory Underground already. And I was like, this is the foundation upon which we will build, not the church, but this other thing, right? And so, for people who don't have that religious background, the point is like Jesus says, on this rock I will build my church. Okay, well, the idea of the university is meant to be a rock to help in rebuilding the actual foundations for the university, because the university is not just a building. The university is not just its administration or its academics, its researchers, its instructors, its students. No, it is an idea. It is an idea that actually organizes people, and it organizes people and our tools, our technology. And so for me, hearing it put forward as an ideal was exciting. And as a person with a sort of background in a lot of Marx and always looking for the material analysis, it was actually really cool, because I generally don't care about this, this ideals discourse. But I also do care about it at a certain point, because if you think that people are not guided by ideals, then just look at all the materialists who keep talking about communism. You guys are that's an idea. Guys, it's an idea. It's not based in reality. Of course, they'll try to use anthropology, cherry-picked anthropology to sort of naturalize their conception or whatever. I'm fine with that. But look, Jaspers is not saying that this is the solution. He's just saying, look, as we rebuild the university system in the aftermath of the Nazi regime, after it just cleaned house of most genuine thinking, which had just happened over the border in Russia as well. He's saying, as we rebuild, let's not turn it into a business place. Let's not turn it into just job training, because the other side of totalitarianism that is political, either communist or fascist, the other side is just capitalist business. And he's saying we have to safeguard against both political totalitarianism and the business motive. And then he talks about these other constituent contradictions between the interests, roles, and functions of the administration, the researchers, instructors, and the students. And he thinks that he thinks that we can't just look at the thing and say, well, I don't like this, and I don't like that, I don't like this, and I don't like that, I don't like this, and I don't like that. No, he says we have to look at the actual ideal and actually tarry with it and think it through. And so having that there at the beginning should be enough for people to understand that we're not just some knockoff of some magazine. Okay, which I just have to say, because people keep being like, oh, you're like this magazine. You're like this magazine. No, we're not, because the idea of the university is sort of actually directing us. If you don't care about intellectual things, if you don't care about understanding for its own sake, if you don't care about a pluralistic discourse between people who ultimately disagree but want to try to understand those contradictions, if you don't care about those things, there's a whole world of internet out there for you. Go to click on, skip, go for it. But there's also universities as they currently exist today, increasingly with the neoliberalization of university. That is a place that is also safe for you, increasingly so. Which is to say, if you don't care about ideas, and you don't care about philosophy, and you don't care about trying to understand the whole, you don't care about a plurality of discourse that tries to unearth these contradictions that otherwise kind of remain these elephants in the room that we kind of forget about, or that kind of whatever. If you don't love that stuff, well, then there's a lot of state universities, at least I'll just speak of from our own experience, that are going to say, yeah, it's just job training. It's just job training. And I think that, we already had that critique, the neoliberalization, ultimately capital, what capital does to the institution. But we didn't have this kind of ideal basis, which is like a sort of North Star for directing a way forward. And so anyway, I hope I sold some people on going and reading Jaspers, because that's my goal here. My goal is just to kind of sell you all on actually reading it for yourselves. Now let's talk about what we could have done better.
You see my finger trying to unmute myself. So here's like what I was thinking is that when you first pitched me doing that course, I didn't you'd been out of town for a long time. We hadn't been in like really close contact in months. And so I didn't know you were really I didn't know anything about Theory Underground at that point. I knew other than a couple voice messages you sent describing what your goal was. And so in my mind, and this is the best it could have been anyway, but I was thinking back 5 or 6 years to the discussion groups that we had on, Saussure, Heidegger, and that was the model I went into it with, not knowing that, you sort of had a different model in mind. And I quit, quickly within the weeks leading up to it, I recognized the model was a little bit different, but because of that, I came into it a little colder than in retrospect I wish I would have. And I kind of was trying to week by week scrambling to stay ahead of the group. And so I really thought of myself more in the end as a facilitator role rather than an instructor role. And so I think anybody who were to sign up for that course now, it would be different from many of the other courses that Theory Underground has done, which particularly I'm thinking of the courses Mikey's done, or the very close reading of Being in Time you're doing, which is built out of years and years sort of spent with the material, where we were all, I think, I was on my second reading of the book, but also reading a bunch of Jaspers for the first time, going through it, trying to contextualize everything and then put it in the context of my own understanding of the sort of educational world. And going forward in the future, I would think of a course of that variety, using that as a text among many, rather than, and we talked about this a lot afterward, a text amongst others, and thinking about either the university as a whole or education as a whole, and pursuing it in that way, rather than trying to anchor how many weeks did we do? 7 or 8? Mm-hmm. 7 or 8 on a very short book. Though I think there was some solid stuff in there. So I'm not saying someone shouldn't go do it, but it will look different than maybe the most recent courses from Theory Underground.
Yeah, and part of it being the first course is we didn't really know who Nance was, we didn't really know who Philip was at the time, and just having already kind of a more established relationship with these people. And there were other people in the course, some who have returned to other Theory Under courses, and there will always be new people in every course and people who kind of come and go. But I think we just didn't know our audience yet. I felt, on the one hand, removed from it because it was kind of my first pass, and I was just coming at it with okay, here's how I can initially relate it to the things that I've been studying in the university. But then also, it felt removed. Okay, I don't remember what I was just trying to say, but I think, having more of an idea of who the Theory Underground audience is and what the goal is, I just think that's become more clear over time. I think I agree with Brian. It would just be a different course. We had also just moved to Mexico, and we're just dealing with weird visa stuff. And I was going through a weird transition period. And so I wasn't necessarily at my best, and would love to even just go back and reteach that exact same course, because I know it would be better and different. But I think as kind of a first go of just really figuring it out, we kind of know what worked and what didn't, and it was it was great because we got to have conversations with Nance and Philip and some of the other students and figure out who is this for, what is kind of the theory underground culture. And I think it was just an important kind of basis for figuring out how much room should we allow for discussion and what should our lectures look like, and figuring out some of those logistics too. And yeah, I think like now that like we live in the same city as Brian now, and so it makes it a little bit easier, I think, to be in more communication. Like it was hard because like, yeah, Brian had said we were just gone. He didn't really get what Theory Underground was about. It was so new. And so it helped. I would think it will help in the future to be a little bit more in mesh with the teaching team. And this was the first course that had kind of 3, and the only course that had 3 instructors. So maybe Dave, you can reflect on that too.
Yeah. I think that one of the big things I've struggled with as I'm wearing a lot of hats, right? I'm wearing many hats here. One of the main things I've struggled with is just taking full ownership for a course. Like there's this part of me that just constantly is like, I do stuff with other people. Now, it's not just, I don't want to take responsibility for a course. It's also like, I am trying to do the administrative side and build out the infrastructure so that I can ultimately teach the courses that I want to teach. And I kind of have to do a lot of juggling. And so co-teaching some courses is a great way. But there's pros and cons that come with it. But there's no cons that came from doing this with the 3 of us. I not from my standpoint. I gave a lecture every time. And one time I was definitely not prepared and pretty much read through a bunch of quotes. But no, it was not just an experiment. I think that if a person was listening to this, but they hadn't actually been there, then they'd probably think that the course kind of sucked or there was kind of a flop because we just spent so much time talking about like what was off about it. So I'll definitely want Nance to chime in here before we move into the next segment on Illich. But before that, I just want to say, because I mean, and Nance, I just mean from the user experience side, you can tell people what it was like or whatever, and maybe you can tell Brian and like how much you think their reflections are accurate or needed or whatever. But my thing is, look, we didn't have the basis in Jaspers that we should have, but we still got so much out of it, and it was more about the anybody who comes through Theory Underground, if they really want to go back to the beginning and see how it started, they get to know the 3 of us, and them getting to know the 3 of us and how we approach questions of critical pedagogy or education, institutions, all of this. It's not straightforward. It's not simple. It's nuanced. It's complicated. It's vexing us. It's personal. It's professional. It's something we've thought about for a long time. And everything that happens at Theory Underground is kind of in that wheelhouse, right? Even when it seems like it's not. But, the second class was the professional managerial class. It's directly related to the idea of university. The What is Sex course is a lot harder to pin down. It's like, well, what's that? Well, ultimately, it's a part of critique of libidinal economy, which is a field as important as CMT. It's CLE. Right, critique of libidinal. It's very important, and Žižek and Zupancic, they're foundational for that. But it's also important for the whole question of like the relations between the sexes and what it is to be a human, because as Mary Harrington says, there's no such thing as a human. There's only males and females. There's only ever been males and females. They're not. The idea of the human has always been secretly coded male, right? And so. People who are contemplative about such things often just squirrel away into some corner and then think about it. And it's a touchy topic and it's hard to approach. And Zupancic kind of sets up some of the tools for being able to think about all of that. Okay. all of the rest of the courses somehow relate. If you can't make the connections, then you just need to retake the courses, I guess. But I think that it was a raging success. To the people in the chat, Cesar Ruiz says, maybe y'all can do the course again, but as a redux that adds to what you already presented. And I just absolutely love that. And then Camille says, feeling irrigated. This might be asking for a lot, but can we dream to someday replace the term intellectual? And so maybe you'll each on your own want to touch on the idea of the intellectual. Nance, I do want you to kind of come on here if you're handy and say something about what your thoughts about the idea of university course might be. And especially, I mean, it kind of seems relevant to Camille's question because you've always wanted to be able to have the freedom to live the life of the intellectual. And so, yeah, what do you think about that question about getting rid of the term intellectual? And then what do you think about what Brian and Anne have had to say about the idea of the university course?
On the question of replacing the term intellectual, I don't know, man. I want to be an intellectual. I want to be seen as someone who's put in work. I think we can absolutely kick down the door, but that doesn't mean do away with the social discrimination or whatever entirely. Like, there is a place for hierarchy, and I'm coming at that from an anarchist perspective. Anyway, no, keep the word intellectual. Just make it accessible to everybody.
Sorry,
one way we can do that is by
post-anarchist, post-Marxist perspective. I know you. I know. I've looked at the cards in your hand. Okay, but keep going.
One way we can do that, making that accessible, and maybe destigmatizing material conditions, but still celebrating excellence, is by having courses about the idea of the university. I think it was fucking great. I think there was probably a period of easing into it for everybody involved, maybe, but I think that worked. I thought it was fucking great. Like at least half the piece that got published that I wrote, that got published in the anthology, was from this course, the idea of the university. And it was like, the university was always kind of this, mystical thing on top of a mystical hill for me, from my perspective, even though I went to school for a little bit on scholarship, but it just didn't work. I had kids and I had a job and shit. So I didn't really get in it and get jaded on it like you guys all have. So I always kind of still looked up to it, but I also kind of had this, I don't know, cynicism where it's all bullshit anyway, because everyone in my life is they've all graduated and they all kind of, I don't want to say they suck. I'm not saying that, but I'm definitely not saying that. But they don't do this stuff that I still remember being a small child and just maybe I'll be a scientist when I grow up. Maybe I'll be like this world of magic that did revolve around, the mind and the life of the mind. And doing that course with you guys, who in the course, you all presented yourself as trustworthy sources of information and trustworthy instructors, really made me feel comfortable. And I thought it was fucking great. Of course it can be improved. What can't be improved? I thought it was fucking great.
Yeah, I would honestly, I think one way we could probably do this would be to come back and have each of us teach an individual course that is a sequel to the idea of university. And that sets up who? Brian. So I'm going to go ahead and make it show your thumbnail here on the screen, everybody, for the rest of this time. Introduction to Ivan Illich.
Can I real quick? I just wanted to respond to the intellectual thing, and then I'm going to turn my camera off so it can just be you and Brian talking about the course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Ryan's outside meowing, and I'm gonna go get him.
Okay.
But I don't know where the commenter is coming from, but like I can understand in the same way that it's like, okay, yeah, if we're leftists, maybe we shouldn't be throwing around the term communism or Marxism because of the perception, the social perception that it has. But rather than saying, oh, then we need to not use that word intellectual because of the connotation it has, from both people on the left who go, oh, it's just elitist white men, and then from like conservatives who go, oh, it's useless. It's like, I think we need to reclaim the term intellectual and make it cool again and make it actually something to aspire to, and realize that being an intellectual or aspiring to intellectual goals and valuing it and having an inner life in the life, developing the life of the mind, like, is valuable in itself. And I go on and on about that, but I say, like, make intellectuals great again. That'll be the hat. So yeah, so I'm gonna turn my camera off, and I'm excited to hear about this course. But thanks, Nance and Brian, and I'll see y'all later.
A really quick note on that. Thanks for reminding us to kind of finish out the note on that, because the issue of intellectuals is really important. I think that one of the issues is that when you start saying that someone's an intellectual, it kind of like assumes that other people are not intellectuals, and then that must mean that they're not contemplative or thinking. And this reaffirms some kind of a class like hierarchy of people should stay in their lanes, and there's a lot of reasons to feel rubbed wrong by that. But also, I just have to say, from like my personal standpoint, I grew up I grew up with no intellectuals around me. None. You could say that there were some organic intellectuals, like my dad is a deep interest in etymology. But actually the fact is, let's be brutally honest. He likes to think about etymology, but he doesn't really get a chance to do etymology. And that's because of time energy structure, the structural stultification of time energy. We can't make conditions better by hiding their brutality. Homeless people don't have homes. When people try to call them houseless, and it's like, oh, by changing language, we somehow made things better by destigmatizing the conditions that they're shut the fuck up. This has been the strong hardline stance at Theory Underground all along. And so it's like, look, at a certain level, I mean, I can respect a person who says houseless. I've had a few conversations on the road on tour with people who kind of like do that. And it's like, cool, just know that you're the outlier in this space. Because we don't think that by changing the names or words we use, we change the reality. And destigmatizing is not the solution. Actually getting people homes is the solution. And it's not a house, it's a home. And a home is not just a building. It's not just where your heart is. It's actually where you can reliably depend upon having shelter. If you don't have reliable dependence on shelter, then you don't have time energy. And so then people try to simplify and flatten poverty, simplify and flatten various kinds of illness. And you have to be a lot more specific. And the structural stultification of time energy, what that actually results in for someone like my dad, is being gone, working before sunup until after sundown, and not really getting to have relationships with his kids during the prime of his life, right? And their most formative years. And that is the one, I would say, the most major cause of the social breakdown of civic institutions, networks, families, communities, and everything else. And people like to just, family's not actually that important, or we could just get rid of this, or we could just get rid of that. Let's just get rid of intellectuals. Look, some people don't need to be intellectuals. I don't need to be a physicist. I don't need to be a chef. There's things I don't need to be, but I need to be an intellectual, and it's a real thing. And if you think it's not a real thing, or that you fix the problems of society by changing the words, then I would just put forward the plea to think more about the fact that no, it shouldn't mean like, oh, you're smart and everyone else is stupid. It should mean you should know that 98% of the time I am thinking about philosophy, theory, books, texts. Like, this is my life. Don't try to erase it, right? And like that erasure is exactly what libraries are doing, and it's exactly what universities are doing today. And so anyway, that's the setup for Brian and this course on Ivan Illich. These institutions that are currently erasing the very meaning of their calling. You say in the little blurb about this course that Ivan Illich is not the lunatic, the anti-school lunatic people take him to be. And I think that's a really strong statement. But to kind of make it make sense, I think you have to first set up people to understand it. And so in these last 25 minutes, I just kind of want to give you the floor here to say, who is Ivan Illich? Why should people care about him? And what does he have to offer to the conversation we've been having in this video so far?
So I'm trying to think about an answer to that question that also responds to the question about the intellectual. And I think it's something like this. Illich is definitively a proponent of deschooling. And so that blurb, the point is more so that his critique of school is in some just like, I hate school. It's full of a bunch of stupid people. You shouldn't do it, which is a sort of anti-intellectual sort of reduction of school to this dumb place. The bigger critique is that schools package and commodify what we naturally strive toward anyway, which is learning. And he goes to like a great degree to distinguish the difference between education and learning. And schools package education. Now, I don't necessarily love the way he uses the language here, but this is kind of how he does it. That schools give us education and learning happens organically, and whether or not we're going to agree with the language, I think that we can see the distinction enough that education is this prepackaged curriculum in which we all have a sort of homogeneous, equalized knowledge of the same things. And basically, because not everyone is going to go entirely through the whole system of receiving the various degrees of awards and honors from high school diploma to associate's degree to bachelor's degree to master's degree, all the way up to the highest tier of some sort of doctorate, it basically automatically creates social hierarchies on the intellectual spectrum that don't actually exist in reality. They don't actually reflect people's cognitive abilities or interests whatsoever. They tend to actually more reflect socioeconomic status more than anything. And so I think part of this, what's at the heart of the question about the problem with the word intellectual is because we have been so fully schooled to accept that the intellectual is the person with the doctorate.
Yeah.
Rather than the person whose way of life is to study and to think, regardless of educational pedigree. But we cannot think, like, it almost becomes impossible to think outside of those lines. And I'd also say that just like at a personal level, because I 100% am not anti-intellectual, meaning that I accept the term intellectual. And it's a good way to describe how I operate in the world. I have a lot of people in my life, family, close friends who are not intellectuals, have no desire to be one. They're not they're not offended by the fact that I am. But because like most people who identify as intellectuals also have the degrees that they often lord over other people, it kind of has become a very, very dirty term if that's the reason, those are good reasons, right?
100%.
What's happening at Theory Underground is trying to push back against that any person can be intellectual, but also a person can choose not to as well. And that has nothing to do with level of education. And that alone is enough reason for me to care about someone like Ivan Illich, because for him, level of education is such a terrible metric for judging a person's intellectual or social organization whatsoever. And that's kind of one of the things I really will want to touch on in the course, is how he gives us a framework for thinking different futures, complete different reorganization of society altogether. Trying to think.
Well, and so let's get briefly into, recently on this channel, everyone now knows that I hear myself. What happened? What's going on here? Is someone else in the chat? Did someone else do something?
That's probably me.
Oh, okay. So Andre Gores is someone that I started reading this year, thanks to Mikey. He was like, "This is our guy." And I was like, "Oh shit, this guy's saying so much stuff that I was like looking for someone to be thinking about." So he's put a lot more time thinking into some of these things than I have. So I can see questions that I keep running into dead ends or walls on, and trying to have conversations, and then they go nowhere. And it's like, oh, this guy, he's got it. He's at least put in so much effort that I got a lot from him. I don't think he's the end or the whole enchilada or whatever, but I like Andre Gores, and so does Nance, and we read the entirety of his Farewell to the Working Class on the channel, and a lot of people, a lot more than I thought, actually listened to the entirety of it and are also now Gores pilled. And then Daniel Tutt, was like, "I don't like that," and so we had a conversation with him, and it was a great conversation. Okay, that's my background for going into the biography a little bit of Ivan Illich, because part of the reason that Gores is so cool is like one of the ways that he relates to our interests outside of the post-Marxism stuff is his having had a lot to do with Ivan Illich and thinking about the distinction between convivial and manipulative tools and institutions that have become purely manipulative, instrumental. Like, instead of just getting rid of them, like actually setting up institutions that would provide convivial tools for people. And so like this sets up Gores to be able to make the distinction between heteronymous and autonomous or cooperative forms of labor. He sets up these three separate spheres and says that currently everything's heteronymous. The point is to restrict to heteronomy merely those kinds of labor that are absolutely necessary, and then let everything else be the autonomous and cooperative forms. That is, I mean, I love it. It's deceptively simplistic. There's a lot more that goes into all of that, and he gets so much of this from the time he clearly spent thinking about Illich's project. So that sets me up to say, who was Illich? What was his project? And how was he affiliated to Gores?
Which is the question you asked up front, and I was trying to search my mind for like, what else did you ask me to talk about? Which was ultimately just the setup for who Illich was. He's sort of an enigma. He had this weird public life that it's kind of hard to pin down exactly who he was. So he was a priest in the Catholic Church. He was educated in Rome. If I remember correctly, he had 2 PhDs, one in history, one in, now I can't remember if it was theology or philosophy. But clearly, when you read Illich across his career, he was preferential to history. He was a historian. He considered himself a historian. I've never once heard him refer to himself as a philosopher. And I think that's important for a course like that. So his theoretical perspective is coming from someone whose primary focus as a historian was the end of the Middle Ages and the transition to modernity, and understanding how that gets us where we are today. And so for him, I think, and something we're going to hit really hard in the course, is the study of the 12th century became a major preoccupation at the end of his life. But it was there the whole time, but it wasn't visible in those books he was writing during the 70s and early 80s, but it became very clear in the days or in the last decades of his life that was sort of always present. And so for context, he was a priest in the church. Without going too deeply into useless biography within the time we have, he ended up founding a center in Cuernavaca, Mexico, on assignment to train missionary priests and lay sort of religious to do missions work in Central and South America, as was determined by the Vatican as the number one priority of the church of that age, was getting missions to Central and South America. He was not a fan of being born in Eastern Europe, and as a newcomer to the United States, he was not a fan of American consumer culture whatsoever. And he saw that basically the missions work, all it was going to accomplish if they just sent a flood of American missionaries to Central and South America was to just transpose American values on those countries. And it just became a form of colonization. He wasn't terribly popular as a result. His center, basically, when they sent missionaries, he was incredibly intense and had incredibly high expectations for anyone that he was going to give a seal of approval to. And many he basically said, "You're not fit to be to do this kind of work," and sent them back to the States. All in all, like, this was happening throughout the 1960s, and by the late 60s, he was under investigation by the Vatican itself. He was never excommunicated or anything like that, but due to controversy, he stepped down from his formal role as priest. And that's kind of where the sort of the through line that is typically known as Ivan Illich is found, as Deschooling Society comes following the stepping down from that role. We'll talk about exactly what that looked like, what his religious life looked like, pretty in depth in the course, because I think that's essential to understand who he was. He didn't stop being a priest, and he didn't stop being religious. And I think that is a really important thing to keep in mind, that is always very important to sort of decoding the polemic that is many of his books. Deschooling Society there are some chapters that are more conceptual, theoretical, and others that are kind of just polemical railings against the institution of school, like in Deschooling Society or other. Most of his books kind of have some weird balance between the two. And so the work that needs to be done across from Deschooling Society, which is the first major book, through In the Vineyard of the Text, which is the last book, is trying to find the sort of kernel that holds it all together, and set aside, because he even openly admitted, like, he was trying to be provocative. He never intended to set a program for the future, which will become apparent why, as you study him, like, it would go against his actual convictions to lay a plan for the future, because he was anti-planning. And so looking at that kernel is essential. And I think the kernel, and the reason I didn't want, like, when we put together the graphic for the course, the word institution, instead the word tool, is because he viewed institutions as just large social tools. And so the kernel is the tool analysis. And so that will take us down the road of, like, Jacques Ellul and McLuhan and others that he was familiar with and in dialogue with in some way.
What?
Like, when you listen to interviews with him, that's who he'll talk about. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So, like, at the death of Ellul, he gave a talk in commemoration and appreciation for how influential that work had been on his own thinking.
Yeah, I definitely
and those
see
are things that we're going to get into.
because anytime you can talk about any kind of techne or technology has its existence as a medium. So so medium analysis is usually like its effect on our consciousness, its effect on our sensory apparatus, its effect on how we perceive and interpret. That's media analysis through McLuhan. Whereas, and I think Ellul takes that up a lot, Virilio, Baudrillard, etc., CMT, critical media theory, that's all about that. But on the other side is technology philosophy. And so when you're talking about technology with Illich, and of course we're thinking about tools, institutions are giant tools, right? Like they're power tools.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and so the reason he's going to go and he's so concerned with the 12th century is he sees in Hugh of St. Victor, who was maybe, I've never heard him say this, but I'm going to say it, that I think he would consider that him like one of his great teachers, was this monk at the Abbey of St. Victor in the 1100s, is that Hugh of St. Victor, he says, is the first individual in the West to systematically analyze tools. Not as what function do they have, but like, or how does like a tool help us fulfill a task, but how do the tools shape our lives? Which is the question he wants to answer. And he finds that in Hugh of St. Victor, and he sees it as a major turning point in the way or in the direction that society tends from that moment on. And it changes the way scripts are used to write. There's a shift in writing that happens directly following the life of Hugh of St. Victor that shifts the way that someone like Thomas Aquinas is able to think within Illich's own thought. And so this is why I say, like, I think really looking at those historical sources that were for him the most pregnant is going to help us understand something much deeper in deschooling society. Because it's really easy to read deschooling society and go, well, we're never going to shut down the schools, they're so permanent, and then kind of go, well, we should move on from it. But if you can see this larger framework that he's trying to work in that says that the world is very, very, very malleable, and it has always shifted and changed and could look any number of ways. But we take for granted, this is also the similar like capitalist realist point that gets made, that like it is like, just be a realist, this is the way it is, just accept it. But his hope was that we could really think of new ways of being in the world, and that I think comes from, for me, it comes with the work that he did on the medievals and late medieval world, early scholasticism, which is where I found Illich. I didn't read Deschooling Society first. I read In the Vineyard of the Text first. Mm-hmm. And it was
I remember that.
a few years before I ever read Deschooling Society. So my understanding of Illich was always the sort of later, more academic. At that point, he was teaching at Penn State. That was my introduction. And then the sort of the radical, trying to be very provocative Illich of the 70s came later. And so maybe that just has helped me to see that there's something much deeper in the work that doesn't always get acknowledged, because he's not really taken serious at this point by many people outside of sort of like critical theory circles. Mm-hmm. And I hope for that to change, because I think he's a genuine, like he's a really, really serious thinker. He just didn't want to be systematic.
So I'll just, I was going to set you up for a question here, but I want to get straight to my real question for you. So I'll just go ahead and just say, look, everybody, when he says schooling, he's not talking about education. And that he thinks that schooling is this other thing that needs to be taken apart. And that what we need is to set up... He
is talking about education. I'll actually correct that. He's not talking about learning.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so
schooling and education are inextricably linked.
Okay.
That schooling produces education, because in the phrase, are you educated or not educated? What you're asking is, do you have a degree or not?
Right. Okay. Thank you. So it's learning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Learning is the basic human tendency to want to know.
There we go. And so it's like, I had a professor who said, don't let your schooling get in the way of your education. And so that I think maybe my brain swapped those terms out. But there's an interesting thing. It's an accident, actually. I did not know that Seminar 11 by Jacques Lacan is the first public seminar that he gave, and that he gave it because he got exiled from the 2 institutions he was teaching in the same year. And that the new institution he went into, the condition of teaching there was that it be public. And so Seminar 11 was the first thing to get published. It's where he really makes his big breakout, but it's called the 4 Fundamental Concepts of Psychoanalysis because he wanted to focus on the 4 fundamental concepts, since it was like, okay, now he's kind of doing this publicly. So, right, let's kind of like set up a new foundation for his work. And so there's kind of like the pre-Seminar 11 and the after Seminar 11 seminars. Well, that course is coming in July. Deschooling Society begins in June and goes into July. It's going to be on Thursdays? Is that what we currently have planned? Yeah, it's Thursdays. June, July. So it's the 13th, 20th, and 27th of June, and it's the 4th of July. We're literally doing the final course of it on the 4th of July because we just don't care. I mean, it's not to say I don't like fireworks or whatever, but come on. Anyway, this is more important. And so for some people who got to do family stuff, I get it. Just, it'll be recorded. You can come back and the conversation doesn't end at the final lecture. But I'm setting that up to say
in the evening of the 4th of July.
Not if you're in the wrong. Well,
daytime.
It's
unless
always in
you're
the evening
Europe,
somewhere.
I guess.
Yeah,
but
unless
then
you're in
probably
Europe.
not celebrating, so it doesn't matter.
Exactly. And so
Go figure.
Deschooling Society, then I didn't realize is similar. So it's kind of funny that Seminar 11 and Deschooling Society are both these sort of exodus or exile. So one is exile, the other is exodus, but they're both leaving institutions in the 20th century. And I say 20th century because Darwin, Marx, Nietzsche, Freud, each is basically foundational to a field, and each of them were either exodus or exile. And so, I mean, is that? Marx was systematically exiled throughout his life, but the rest of them are basically just doing underground theory early on, like proto-underground theorists. And so, thinking of Illich as one is really interesting, but then also thinking of him as a follow-up to Nick Land course. So the intro to Nick Land course sets up the probably the most radical anti-human futurist position. And then we get to follow that up with probably one of the most radical humanist positions. And that's what I'm so excited about, everybody. This year is going to be off the charts. So I just want to give you a moment to close out. I don't know what you'll want to riff off of from all of that, but we're basically at time. So you got a couple minutes here to close out.
I was listening to an interview with Illich earlier today. And he more or less, like, because this interview was in the late 80s, so computers were officially like on the market, and he was talking about how he could spot writing that was composed on a computer. Like, he just knew. And he also like basically said that computers are, he didn't say it outright, but like they are like going to be the birth of anti-humanism. That there's something so fundamentally unhuman. We'll have to take that up in the course. It was kind of a in passing comment, but like he did think a lot about cybernetics as such. And, but I do think like for him, I'm going to be thinking about that one for the next 6 months, is the sort of the computer, because he saw the way that the technology of putting our thoughts down in a permanent place shifted over the last 1,000 years, changed the way we think. But he was entirely a pessimist on the computer and the ability, like he apparently wasn't thinking about our ability to do something like we're doing right now, which I think is fantastic that we're able to do this. And he said he would never buy a computer. anyway, I don't want to close with that. I want to close with so at Cuernavaca, the center he had, I think we'll spend definitely the first week of the course talking a lot about that center itself and the sort of intellectual milieu that he would belong to. Because like the Nick Land course, for those who were in it and for those who weren't, you should go do it. What Land was doing with the CCRU, Mikey was trying to show, is a model for different ways of approaching underground theory. And Cuernavaca is a similar but completely different approach to doing underground theory. It's similar in that it is underground. It is not, it basically had been removed from any university affiliation and funding, and they were funding themselves off language programs, teaching languages to foreigners, Spanish principally. That money was then used to offer a shitload of courses. And so we'll spend a lot of time talking about that. And I think it is a really cool way to think about what they were doing in person in Mexico is very similar to what's happening with Theory Underground, but on the interwebs. And so I think that was like my inspiration for this course. Like if Nick Land makes sense to do a 4-week, crash course on, Illich is essential.
No, this is
because I don't think of Illich as primarily the guy who wanted to shut down the schools.
Yes.
I think of him as someone who wanted to radically reimagine our world and the way that intellectuals exist in the world and the way that non-intellectuals exist in the world. He cared not just about preserving. I think we tend to, those of us who are intellectuals, to get back to this point, we tend to think only in terms of the world should be more like us. And I think what is sort of a breath of fresh air in Illich is that he recognized that the world is full of a lot of people who are going to, when given autonomous free time to do as they please, they're going to do innumerable number of things. Sometimes those pursuits will be intellectual, sometimes people to do with themselves what they want to do with their time is the most important thing, even if they're going to fuck up and do it wrong. Even if they're going to miss the mark. I think that's one of the central pieces there. And it's really refreshing in a world where we're told that everyone kind of has to be alike.
Thank you, Brian. I can't wait for your course. Take care.
See ya.
We'll have OG Rose up next.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, where workers with earbuds can find genuine liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is a publishing house as well as lecture course and social media platform. You've been reading Underground Theory.
Yes.
And
amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Jesus Christ.
Seriously.
This is a little experiment in what I, David McKerracher, can pull off without relying on the academy or the algorithmic dictates of the attention economy. I believe that I am, like so many others, pioneering a future in which educators can form learning webs that will make learning as a way of life enjoyable and emancipatory. However, before these tools become accessible, they have to be experimented with. That's why I built my own website and app using nothing more than my own saved wages, 5 patrons, and some small classes of students over the last year. Of course, I also have had my wife Anne's moral support and help with accounting so that I don't get in trouble with the IRS or whatever. In less than a year, Theory Underground has already put out 8 courses, 2 books, one, my book, Timenergy, and the other, Underground Theory, which has over 30 contributors, including works written by students at Theory Underground, some of my fellow travelers, and colleagues in the broader universe of underground theory. Beyond the books and courses, though, You will also find interviews, reading exegetical reaction sessions, and live weekly events for working class autodidacts, independent researchers, and renegade academics. These include a variety of clubs and cohorts that meet on a weekly or monthly basis. If you want to get involved, there are 4 main subscription levels.
Think of it like a gym membership, but for your mind.
The point is to make learning, practice, and theoretical comprehension a way of life. If I can triple my subscribers in the next 2 months, I can quit my gig at Amazon and focus on this work full time. All I need is a few more people at each of the levels, or a couple big time patrons who just want to see it happen. Right now I am doing a patron and site subscriber drive, so excuse the commercial. But if you end up really liking what goes on at this channel, consider signing up soon. I hope that you either will or have enjoyed the program, and also make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and leave this playing in the background all the time while you're doing other things.
Playing long-form Theory Underground content in the background while you do things has, in the near future, been scientifically proven to emancipate minds from the functional illiteracy imposed on workers by the structural stultification of time energy. This is achieved by reterritorializing circumspective concern.
Also, to some degree, it is for the algorithm.